Howdy y'all, welcome back to Little Bits. I am here in beautiful Montevideo, Uruguay, talking more about MPM2 on Z180 for Small Computer Central. I have a couple of corrections to make from my last video. For this build of MPM2 for Z180, I've said that we need to tie the DREC1 line high. I had that backwards, we need to tie it low, and it shows that in the code. Also, we don't need to tie it low at all. We can change the code. We only need the DREC line pulled high, which I am doing on this particular system with a pull down resistor between line pin 47, which is the DREC1 line on the Z180 RC bus 80 pin standard. It's normally unused on the Z80 80 pin standard. You can use it for anything you want, but this is where the Z180 puts its DREC1 line. And I'm tying it between line 47 and line 57, which is just a ground pin. And that's how I'm tying it low on this system. On the other system I'm showcasing, we have a jumper that we can set to pull that line low. You can pull it low, or you can turn off the DMA support, which I will show in the video. And we're actually going to test something a little later on because I run into some problems along the way. What I found and what is documented is that not all CPM applications, commands, work correctly with MPM2, and I found some issues with Nulu that we will explore kind of in the second half of the video, kind of more towards the end. And it actually kind of interferes with some of the work we're doing, but you'll see as the time comes. Today we're going to focus on setting up our second user. We're also going to talk about a little bit about whether we're going to make that user administrative, giving them commands that allow them to alter the system or assume the role of other users, particularly the user command. Or we could potentially create a non-administrative user, making copies of games, for example, to make a gaming user. All they can do is kind of list the directory and run the games, for example, if you wanted a user that you don't want to interfere with the system. And we'll show today I'll show you how to set up those users. I'll show you how to troubleshoot some issues that we run into along the way. And yeah, so this one's gonna be kind of long. You don't necessarily need all of it, but it is pretty educational if you are trying to use MPM2. We're also going to cover using the Aztec C toolchain. We'll look a little bit at a comparison between the Aztec C toolchain and the High-Tech C toolchain. Now, we're using Aztec C on MPM2 because it works. The High-Tech C toolchain does not seem to function at all on MPM2, which is another example of a CPM application that simply does not work on MPM2 or otherwise has trouble. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't make it work. There may be some tricks we can do. There may be some alterations we can make, especially since we do have access to source code files for the High-Tech C toolchain, but that's for another video. So without further ado, please like, subscribe, do all the YouTuber things, visit my Patreon, and we'll get started looking at the command line. Peace. So here we go. We're going to start by getting into the MPM2 source code directory. Now, I've made some changes in here, and these changes aren't going to be saved. This is a Git repository. I'm not going to commit most of these changes to Git or anything. Let's take a look at the ZIOS for Z180. Now you can see here, this is where we can change the DMA transfer for CF cards. This is direct memory access. It's built into the Z180. And you can see support for it was added in 1.4. This is the line we need to change in order to turn it off. We just set true to false. And then we can rebuild our ZIOS and we can rebuild our kernel. We're not going to do that yet. We will do that a little later when we test functionality between DMA enabled and DMA disabled. I haven't done any benchmarking yet, but I plan to do that in the future to see which is faster. DMA is ostensibly faster, but that's not necessarily true. Here's where we build the Zios, and then we would copy the file created over into kernel, and we would rebuild the kernel. Again, we'll do that later. This user binaries directory is a place I prepared for our administrative user. If we're going to create a second user on the system that's administrative, we want to give them access to all the tools that we have. Now, this is going to be all the CPM tools, all the .PRL tools that are actually MPM2 specific. You can see I'm looking at pip.com. That's one of the tools that a regular user could use to gain administrative access on this system if you didn't want them to be administrative. So, if you're trying to avoid giving someone full access, you might want to create a different directory. For example, gamer binaries. If we just wanted to create a directory where we install games, we can make a directory here. We can load it up with games. Now we're opening a new tab here. No, that's not what we're doing. Now, we're going to do this a little differently because we already have games installed on the system. But if you wanted to collect games, this is where you would go. I've shown you in previous videos where you can get some games, but we can also take a look at my website where I have distributed some collections of games. This is magesguild.io that we're going to. And you can see I have a lot of good stuff here for you if you want to work with these systems. This multi-booting article I particularly recommend. But we're going to go to downloads, and there's a lot of cool stuff here to download. Things I've prepared, things other people have prepared, but I'm just distributing. The X modem install is super versatile. It really helps with transferring files onto the system of any CPM build. It works on every CPM I've tried. It does not work in MPM2 by itself. We've talked about that in previous videos about how the queuing system for the serial connections interferes with that, and that's something that Thaddeus is working on. There's vetted source if you want to rebuild vetted yourself, add custom, key bindings and things like that. You can get the vetted source code. That's also available on GitHub, of course. We have SSource, that's a Vi-like text editor. It doesn't work very well. We actually need a better Vi text editor for CPM and MPM. It would really help out a lot if we could get a good Vi. I am trying to work with the S text editor to get better Vi support. We also have Veza, which is by Synstra. That's the Z machine interpreter that we use to play most of our games. There are games available that are native to CPM, but I mostly use Veza and Z machine code. Let's go ahead and connect to the system. We're going to boot into CPM. Now, when we're in CPM, the dir command is built in. It's something we always have access to, no matter what user we are. We can switch users. We can see that we can use the dir command. User 1 has an empty file system in the A drive. We can see our games in the C drive under user 0. Switch back to user 1. Take a look at the C drive there. There's nothing there. So there's a couple ways we can install games for a user. For example, if we wanted 2 separate users with 2 separate spaces, we could copy our games over. We would have 2 copies of the games, 1 per user. And that's a pretty space inefficient way to do it, but it is a very easy way to segregate each user's tools, each user's access to games. Now, the easiest way to move files between users right now is to use new. We create a library archive And Nulu is smart enough to know you can feed it which user you want to extract files to. So right here, we're going to go ahead and add all our games to a new library. We just throw 50 in there because we might want to add more games to it later, but we actually run into a problem a little later that I'll talk about. Now I'm skipping a lot of the waiting that's happening. You can see I just skipped a bunch of waiting because it does take a long time to build out these repositories, build out these libraries. These are slow systems compared to modern systems, so you will be waiting. We can confirm that we have our LVR package. And now if we wanted to give those files to user one, we just open the library and then we can extract the files to A1. And Nulu is just smart enough to know, you can see here, we're sending these games to A1. So it's still the A drive. Now these drives are not, they're only logically separated. So when you copy multiple files over to a single directory, that directory the space fills up, the physical space fills up, even if not all users have access. And you can see here, user one has access to all of the games. And we're not in MPM2 yet, we're still in CPM. CPM is the basis of all this, and it is a single user operating system. So there's really no reason to worry about, which user has access to which tools while you're booted into CPM. But we are preparing a user for MPM2. So we're making a new library here because I thought I created it in B, but I created it in A drive. And that's because you have to specify which drive you want to create new libraries in. And I did not do that. I changed into the B drive and expected it to just land there. This is not a modern operating system. A lot of times you have to be very explicit with what locations you feed the command line, or else it will not do what you expect it to do. It doesn't assume that the current drive is the working drive necessarily that you want to place things in. And that's based on various tools. Here we're going to back up our new archive back to B, where I wanted it out of the first place. We're going to copy it over, and then we're going to remove it from A so that we don't take up too much space in A. That's done. I don't know what I'm waiting for here. And you can tell my videos are lower quality. I usually record these audios as I'm making the command line tutorials, but right now I'm doing it after the fact, and so I have a few bits of dead space in here. They're meant for me to give you details, but I have no details to give you at the moment. So here we go. We've moved it over. We've erased it from A so that we have our space back. We just want this in B for now because it's an empty directory. We're not using up too much space there. We want to add the directory command at the very least, even for our non-administrative user, because they need to at least be able to look at what's in the directory. And once we're booted into npm2, the dir command is no longer built in. And here I'm trying a few other commands. Dir s, sdir, those are both included with npm2. They are npm2 commands. This command here that I've just run, it will let you kind of stop and look at the files. It won't just spit them all out. So if you're not on a terminal like I am, where you can scroll up and down easily, if you're, for example, using the terminal module to connect to a real screen, you may not be able to scroll up and down. So you might want to use this command instead to look at your directory. So here we are, we're adding dir.prl. And now we can extract that file over to our second user, user one. And you see I specify just that file because I've already extracted the rest of the files. I don't need to worry about that. But now it's part of the archive. So I have that archive. I can back it up. I can send it to my main computer as a backup if I want to. You see here, dir is the first command for user one. And all they have is the directory command and the VESA tool and some games. So we boot into NPM and then we open a new tab. Now I have two FTDIs connected, one to serial 0, one to serial 1, and each of these tabs is connected to one each. So here's user one. Once NPM is booted up, user one, you just have access. So you can see user one has their full commands. They can't do anything administrative. They can't pip files over from another user. They can't change users themselves. The only thing they can do is run dir, and they can run VESA. So here's an example of us running a game. The reason this scrolls too much is because I have the text inflated so that y'all can see the text on a phone screen if you're watching this on a phone. If you have a normal text size, you shouldn't have VESA just scroll past. You shouldn't have to scroll back up to see the top of this text. This is a fairly new game. It was recently open sourced. I've talked about it before. It's a really fun game. I haven't gotten too far into it, but I've gotten kind of far. But I do have a save on kind of my main gaming system, which is not this one, because this is a heavily experimental system that I often wipe and reinitiate. Here's an example of us saving. Just want to show you that saving and loading works, restoring, as they call it. We relaunch the game. We can demonstrate restore. And you see, I've only made one move so far, but you see that I restored at exactly that point. So if you ever want to put the game down, I mean, this is a necessary feature, but I've tinkered with systems where save and restore don't work correctly until kind of later updates. VESA is not, that's not a problem with VESA though on any build I've tried. And you see, I'm trying to do user. I'm trying to change things. And you can see that the user command is not built in on NPM2. The dir command needs to be called directly. So you have to, if you're in drive C and you want to see what's in there, you've got to call from drive A. You've got to call the command explicitly. Now, I would like to see some pathing available on this system, and maybe we'll try to figure out how to do that later. It does not seem, from many of the manuals I've read, like NPM2 supports pathing, which is where, it searches automatically for commands in a path where you've got it configured to where it finds them automatically, like on Linux and Windows. Instead, you've got to call everything explicitly. So we're opening a third window just to get back to our source code. We're going to look at those user binaries again. Now, I prepared these binaries from the collection provided in the tools directory. Again, these directories I've created are just kind of there to help me consolidate items so that I can then build them into a .lbr archive for transfer, because we don't want to be transferring these files one at a time. It's a huge pain to try and do that. So we're looking for bin 80, include 80, and lib 80. Those are the ones we really need. And bios.bin, ignore it. The author of this has added the bios.bin to the source code repository since I last uploaded a video, so you shouldn't have to manually move that like I showed in the last video anymore. If you get this code base now, it should include that BIOS.bin, which is part of the ZXCC build toolchain, which is used to build the kernel and the ZIOS. You don't need anything from either of these directories. These are just these are used as part of the build process on your system, on the host system, and you don't need these to build on the target system. If you're going to rebuild things on the target system, you shouldn't need any of these. They won't run anyway. They're not designed for Z80. The NPM binaries is where we put our first user stuff. That's how we built the first users directory that allows us to boot into NPM in the first place. Now you see I've got a recipe file here for user tools LBR. That again, that .rec is just a arbitrary thing. This is how you create it. It's already created, so let's look at it. The top file is the file of the archive that will be generated, and everything else is a file to be included. And you can see, you might want to look over this and make sure you don't have any extraneous files. I often end up with readme.mds or build.cmd files in here, which you'll see me remove from the npm binaries a little later. Now this directory is intended for a full administrative user. They're going to have everything they need to build code. They'll be able to change users. They'll be able to pip stuff over from other users. They'll be able to modify the system essentially, just like an administrator. And that's what we want for this particular build, really. Again, if you want a non-administrative user, leave it at the game system, leave it at whatever commands you want to give them. But remember that if you give them a build toolchain, a C build toolchain or assembly build toolchain, they will be able to write commands that allow them to do administrative stuff. So here we want to xmodem the user tools library down. Now that took too long. I took way too long to get there, so I'm just trying again. I'm going to navigate to the directory I need ahead of time so that it doesn't take too long. This xmodem build, as much as I praise it, it does not wait long enough to receive before it kind of times out. And it will time out and give you an error, but sometimes it acts like it's waiting and it's really done. It's not. If you take too long and you don't see it uploading, try again. And here we go, another example of me failing to call it explicitly. So we want to xm, and we want to put it in B because we don't want to take up the space in A. Not yet. Here I've passed it. I've passed the file I need. And this one's going to fail. I can already tell this one's going to fail. So I'm just going to try again. And remember, we are in CPM2 right now. We have not booted into MPM2 yet. We're still, XM does not work on MPM2. So don't expect that to function. Here we go. Here's our user tools. I did boot into NPM2 a little earlier, but I've since rebooted, and I might have cut that footage out. Here I'm going to skip past some of this upload. And if you have trouble with this and you're using Minicom or another system like it, check if hardware flow control is on. It needs to be off for this particular build of xmodem to receive or send files. By default, on my build of Minicom, it is off. All right, so here we're just going to extract the contents of that over to A1. And I've skipped some of that extraction because, again, it takes a long time. Those .lib files are last because I added them manually, because those I did forget. In the first video, I forgot to bring those, but we're going to do some C coding today, so I need to make sure I have them all, because we have to link against those libraries, at least the c.lib at the very least, in order to build something useful. Sometimes I type dir just out of habit. I'm just like, okay, let's double check what's the content. So we're booting back into NPM, and here on our second tab, our user one came up. We were still logged in, and now we can see we have all the administrative tools. So user one can do everything that user two can do. We also have our games in the same directory. Now, that might not be ideal. We don't necessarily want everything in the A drive, especially across two users, because as I said, these copies of these files take up space. These are logical separations. They're not physical separations. So the A drive is the A drive. Across all users, it's the A drive. You just can't see another user's contents. So you want to make sure you are using your space effectively. So we're going to remove all the gaming stuff. And we can do a couple things. There's a couple ways we can handle games. As I said, we can make copies of the games. So we can put, for each user that we want running, we can just put a copy of the games in the C drive, or we can just put a copy of the games on a third user, and then all our users can switch to that user. I'm going to show both those configurations today. We're back in user 0, our first user here. And we're just looking at the contents. Again, I type dir very often just as kind of a, hey, let's sanity check where we're at, what's in our directory. We're still in NPM2, so if we want to call stat, we have to make sure we call it explicitly. And here we're back in our second tab, and we switched between users. So user one can switch between user 0 or any other user on the system. So user one can jump over to user 0. So if you're both using the system, you can both be user 0, which shouldn't cause any problems. But if you're writing to the same file, then you want to be careful. Here we're trying to rebuild a new copy of the game directory that includes administrative user tools. Now this is for the concept of, say we want to put the games in a third user space, say user 2, and then both user 1 and user 0 can just change users into that directory. Since we assume all users on the system are in fact administrative users, we're going to go ahead and give that third user the user.prl command as well as the dir.prl command so that they can switch back to the user they used to be after they're done gaming. While that builds, we can do stuff with user one. So you can see, again, here's an example of two users doing tasks at the same time. Again, it's slow. This dir command is taking its time, but it is running simultaneously with the rest of the system with the Nulu build. Now we are going to run into something interesting here with Nulu, and I alluded to it before. Nulu on NPM2 does not work exactly as expected. And what I found is that after 15 items, after adding 15 items to an archive, it simply fails. But while we wait for that, we're going to go ahead and try and create a hello world and demonstrate the Aztec C build toolchain. And you see me struggling a little bit. I change coding languages so often that it is easy for me to forget syntax unless I have documentation in front of me. It's easy for me to mix up syntax between languages. And then you're going to see that I have a very incorrect declaration of argv here. Now, this is an older C syntax, and it is compatible with high-tech C, but you need to use this syntax when you are using Aztec C. If you want Aztec C to build your code, you need to declare your function variables like this. And of course, this is the wrong, you can see that I need car star star argv. I don't need car argv star. And here's me experimenting with an open bracket at the end. This seems to be a syntax error. It seems like the open bracket needs to be below that, that declaration, but we'll find that out momentarily. So this is super simple. Hello world. We're going to add a return here because we have an int main, so we might as well return an int as the idiomatically correct way to do that. You'll see I sometimes forget it. It doesn't, I don't know if you can check the return value on CPM or MPM2, but here we go. We're saving. And we check back over on user one. It's still updating the archive. Check the contents of our code, make sure it's saved correctly. Again, I have a syntax error here. We're going to see some errors come out of the Aztec C compiler. You can see that it doesn't like that open bracket where it's at in particular. That car argv it's technically wrong, but it shouldn't cause a syntax error like this. It's pretty much that open bracket that fall after the directly after the semicolon that seems to be the main problem. Now, I don't want to try and edit this with add. I'm not very good with add. I was good with it for a while, but then I switched to Vedit, and here's an example of an option for pip. If you use the G option, which you put in square brackets like this, and 0, what you're telling it is get the file from user 0. So as long as you have the pip command, you can copy files from another user using this G option. So we're copying Vedit over, and we're not getting all the files we need because there are some extraneous help files that Vedit can use that you want installed, and I do include those in my vedbin.lbr distributed on my website. Meanwhile, we can switch back over, check what user one's doing, because we have 2 tabs open here at the top. 3 technically, but 2 of them connect to this computer, one to user 0 and one to user 1. It's a bit slow to open because we are doing a lot of disk activity with user 0, but it's open now and we can edit the file. Now, I have set up this build of Vedit to where the arrow keys work, but on MPM2, they don't work. So you want to use the control characters, which I have trouble remembering. I think it's like Control D to move left, Control S maybe to move, actually Control S to move. It's a mess. I think it's Control C to move down, Control E to move up, Control D to move right, Control S to move left, which this is also the wrong syntax. You see, I changed that open bracket, but I still haven't fixed my argv declaration. And we're not even using argv. I just wanted to demonstrate that that's how you declare variables. Oh no, see, that's wrong. It doesn't like that either. It's like that. What is that? I don't know what that is. So here I think we finally get it right. Again, I'm struggling. And for y'all, anybody out there who's a good coder, we need a Vi. The community needs a Vi clone, and not just any Vi clone. We need a Vi clone that can open arbitrarily large files. We need a Vi clone that is capable of opening gigantic files and paging as necessary to open the file. We don't want something that says, oh, this file's too big for memory, so I'm not going to open it, which is how the S editor works right now. And we need it to be accurate and not buggy like the S text editor is right now. But for now, we're using Vedit until I can, or somebody else can correct that. So once we do CC on a correctly formatted C code file, we get this .asm version. CC generates that ASM version, and then you use AS to turn that ASM version into a .o file. That object file needs to be linked to the c.lib file, and from there we actually get an executable binary. Now this is a very common tool chain series of steps. You want to process and compile, assemble, and then link, and that's what most C compilers do today. And you'll even see High-Tech C does it automatically. When you call High-Tech C, it steps through all the process. And we'll show that a little later when we compare the two. I'll boot into a ZPM3 installation on another computer, and I'll compare it to Aztec C on MPM2. So there's our code. It works, it compiles, it builds. It's very simple. If you really start to dig into this, the documentation is available. I'll show you where to find it here shortly. And you can learn how to use Aztec C and start building stuff for MPM2. Now we want to cover how to create .prl files, but here's a list of the Aztec C header files, the libraries that you can pull from. And we were just using std.io or stdio.h. Now, this is where we're building. This is another computer. I've changed my terminal set up directly. I'm no longer plugged into user 0 and user 1. Instead, I'm plugged into user 0, and on another computer, I'm plugged into user 0 for a ZPM3 install. You can see I'm booting into ZPM3 now. I have covered ZPM3 in another video quite extensively. You can see we can even use the clock multiplier to get twice the speed out of this thing. You do have to add memory and IO wait states so that your peripherals can keep up, because some of them don't like a clock speed that fast. But this is something I'd like to figure out how to do for the MPM2 build as well, so that we can boot into MPM2 and apply the clock multiplier and get twice the speed out of it. But that may not be very simple, because this depends on the HBIOS that comes with ROM-WBW, and the support for doing that is built into that. So it may be a little more complicated than I can figure out on my own. Here is a C program that I wrote to examine the MMU, the memory management unit, which is again built into the Z180. And the CBAR, BBR, and CBR are the registers that control these FA, F9, F8. These are the addresses of the registers, and these control the configuration of the memory management unit. You only need to know CBAR to really understand what the memory management unit is doing, but BBR and CBR give you a little more information. And I'm not going to explain how this works in this video, because it's complicated and it's a whole nother topic, but I do use this program to examine the MMU and just kind of get an idea what it's doing on any given build of any given. You can boot into a monitor and probe these ports and figure out, is the monitor set up default? Does it have any custom things? Now here's I'm trying to rebuild this thing. I didn't show the errors that came out, but after 15 items, it did not add the rest of those games when we were trying to build that earlier. Meanwhile, here are the manuals for our two primary C build tool chains that we use on CPM2. Again, High-Tech C is very nice and it's very capable, and I haven't compared it much to Aztec C. I'm sure it's just as capable, but if you wanted to get to the manuals, this is how I do it. This is the High-Tech C code base that we're actually running on ZPM3, and they provide the documents we need, both in TXT and PDF format. In fact, I think there's some slightly different information in each of these, because I have had to refer to both before. So we can download a copy directly from there. The Aztec C manual I have open in that first tab. I just Googled it and it came right up. I'm not sure exactly which version of Aztec C we're running. I'm sure it will print it, or did print it, but you want to, if you're switching between these two, you want these manuals available for yourself because you're gonna see differences. For example, High-Tech C has in-P and out-P as the function calls for reading and writing ports, whereas Aztec C just has in and out. So uh, if you're writing code that you want to be portable between the two, you might want to use some macros to define some of those things so that they're conditionally defined so that if you're trying to build the same code with either compiler, you might have to do some conditional compiling. And meanwhile, here's npm2's documentation. This is the build of npm2 that we are running. And there's a programmer's guide, there's a user's guide, and there's a system implementer's guide. So depending on what you want to do, what you're trying to do, if you're trying to add functionality to Zios, you want the system implementer's guide. If you want to learn how to code for npm2 effectively, you want this programmer's guide. If you want to just use the system, the user's guide is obviously the best. Let's go back over to our command line after that sidetrack. And here I'm going to test something. I don't know for sure yet until I do this whether High-Tech C will actually compile the old school style of parameter definitions for your functions. So I'm going to just change this to what I expect to type in Aztec C based code. And again, here I'm struggling because I'm used to Vi and Vim. And so I have a little trouble navigating these files in this particular text editor. It's way easier than using Ed, but it's definitely harder than using Vi or Vim. And you see, I forget to do a return. Even though we have an int main, I did not return 0 on this one for success. Here we're calling High-Tech C. Oh, I called the wrong file. Forgot the extension. And High-Tech C, I'll show you in a little bit what it actually does. This warning, I don't know why it's there. I very clearly, explicitly define C bar as an int, but it's telling me I have an implicit int declaration here, and I don't understand why it's doing that. I think that's just a bug or something, but there may be a reason that I don't understand. Now I can run, now I already had a mmuread.com from a previous build, but you can see I rebuilt it and it built just fine using the new syntax, the old syntax really, the syntax I changed it to. And again, you see that in-P C bar, you want to be careful because that is specific to High-Tech C. Here I'm going to show you, you can get a help output from High-Tech C, but here's a verbose output. You're going to see the steps High-Tech C actually takes to turn your source code into a binary executable. And as you see, it's very similar to what we manually did with Aztec C. First, it runs a preprocessor. P1, I believe, is a optimizer, and then CGen, I'm not sure exactly what that does, but ZAS is the compiler, so it does produce a ASM file along the way, or is the assembler. It does produce an ASM file along the way somewhere. You can see that it's linked everything together. It erases any temporary files it creates along the way. And that's how we get our MMURead command. And this is what our current memory management unit is set up as. Again, I'm not going to explain what any of that means. We could talk about that in a whole nother video, but it can be important to understand systems implementations on Z180 if you want to do any kind of interesting paging strategies, if you're writing your own firmware, if you're writing your own operating system, if you're supporting an operating system such as MPM2. And I cut out a lot of content where I was really trying to figure out what was going on with this thing, and I'll show you later exactly what was going on. But I'm going to go ahead and send those files over to a third user, user 2, so that we can share the space between users. Looking at our MPM2 documentation, specifically the programmer's guide is not where we want to be. We want to look at the user guide. We can find out how to set jobs in the background, and they don't call them background tasks as far as I know. They call them detached tasks, and some of these detached tasks are not as robust as in modern operating systems. A lot of times you can detach a process and it will run in the background, but if it needs to output to the console again in order to move forward, you need to reattach it, or it'll just kind of wait until it's reattached. It won't necessarily finish. And Nulu is specifically one of these ones where it'll kind of copy one file either to or from, whether you're extracting or creating an archive, either to or from the archive. And then when it's done with that file, it wants to print, okay, I'm going to do the next file. And if you don't have it attached, it'll just sit there forever and not ever tell you and not ever move forward. But if we look for our control characters, we can see a number of control characters. Now, control P is for printing stuff. We don't need that. Control D is what we're looking for here. And control D is a little weird because it doesn't necessarily detach and attach one to one. If you detach it and it's running in the background, here you see I try to detach it and that works. Then I try to attach it again and it's just kind of saying, oh, attach temp 0. Well, that's because it's still working on a job in the background. Now I attach it again and it's ready. It was done moving that file and it said, okay, I want to print something. So it attached this time. And that's something I learned. Now I'm detaching it again and it's in temp 0. And so as user 0 in NPM2, while that's running in the background, I can perform another process. Now some junk ended up on the command line there, so I had to retype my command. We're going to create a new MMU read file. And here I just kind of skipped. I typed the whole thing out. And here's the contents we created. It's identical to the other one, except we included a return C and we changed that NP to an N because that's what Aztec C expects. That's how it defines that particular function. So we go through our regular process of we compile it, we assemble it, and then we link the object file to c.lib. If you're including functions from m.lib, you'll need to include that in your linking. If you're including functions from rom.lib, you'll need to include. And you can see here that MMU setup for each of these systems is dramatically different. And this is one reason we don't see NPM2 available for ROM-WBW. ROM-WBW always has HBIOS available. Even if you're booting your own application, your user app, you can access HBIOS from that user app because it's always in memory. And the XIOS is not compatible with HBIOS. You could theoretically write a XIOS that was compatible with HBIOS, but the ROM-WBW developers have themselves stated that they would need to do a tremendous amount of rework to make ROM-WBW compatible with NPM2 due to just various major differences in how it pages, how it does its memory paging. So here we have a single tab, single terminal tab. We're on user 0. Here's where I kind of discover some stuff. So we want to pay attention to when we open this library, the total items, the deleted items, and the free items. We're creating a new one here, so we're just going to create 50. We might want to add more games later. This is where I'm showing you the failure. So we skip ahead, and after 15 items, and this is only happening on MPM2. This will not happen to you on CPM if you haven't booted into MPM2 yet. After 15 items, we get this error. Drum roll. Boom. Media changed. Now, we didn't change the media. There's no reason to get this error. So, okay, well, let's try again. Let's try and add these files again. But you see these 12 deleted files. That's important. And these free files. These deleted files count towards the used files. And all these files that did not make it, they seem to have increased the deleted files counter. Up here, there's 0. We just created this library, so there's 0 deleted files. But when you delete files out of one of these LBR binaries, and this is the 16th file that it failed on CStock, it increments this deleted file. So if you try to add more later, and look, again, that incremented the deleted files again by 12. If you try to create more later, you will run out of space. And it's not that you're out of space, it's that you're out of pre-allocated entries. And I don't notice this during this build. But you see, I exit out of it, I enter back into it, and I try again. Once you exit out of Nulu and enter back into it, and try again, it seems to continue, but it will only do it for another 15 items. And I will confirm that here shortly. I'll show you by trying to create just a test.lbr that has way more than this 20 some odd files that we have here. You see I have free 0 files, right? And here I'm going to try, in a little bit, I'm going to try and add that user.prl and that dir.prl. And it's going to fail. And I'm not even going to notice it at first. And it's going to fail because we have no free entries left. Those deleted files are taking up entries. So you do want to be careful when you're creating Nulu repositories on NPM2 with Nulu, because this seems to be a problem. And again, this might be something we can fix. Now we're going to back up this directory, or we're going to back this up into the O directory. And here we're testing, we're testing exactly how many, because I wasn't sure if it was a space issue or something else, but it seems to be some kind of problem with how Nulu interacts with NPM and its memory management system that makes it think after 15 files that the media has changed, or at least it causes some kind of problem that the best error Nulu can kick back is the media changed error. And there we go, after 15 items. It just can't do any more. Media changed, it says. So these are some of the kinds of things you might run into as you work with NPM2, because again, NPM2 is a different operating system. And while it's largely compatible with CPM tools, it is not guaranteed to be compatible with CPM tools. And Nulu, as this build of Nulu is a CPM tool. And again, look at that deleted. Look how many deleted files there are. Only 16 active entries, one of which is not a file. There's always one active entry on any LBR file. There's always at least one more. There's one more than what it contains. So here I am. I'm not sure if this is a problem with the DMA. Here I want to test. Okay, is this a problem with the DMA being enabled or not? So I go ahead and I built this a little earlier, but let's just double check, confirm that we build it. We copy the file we created, the bankxios.spr, into the kernel. And if I want to be certain I'm copying a specific file, I'll use the -I command, and that way it prompts me, file exists, do you want to overwrite it? Yes, I want to make sure I'm copying the exact file to the exact file. So then we rebuild the kernel. I don't know why I'm slow here. All these are set up from the last time I built it, so I do just need to take the defaults, but of course I take a moment to kind of pause and stare at the screen on a couple spots. Now we have a newly built kernel that does not include DMA support. Now you don't need to unpull your direct line from low. If you have your direct line pulled low, you don't need to change that. It still works. But if you want DMA enabled, you do need that pulled low. Again, here I am. I'm just making sure I am copying the files I want to copy, that I'm not missing anything. It's just a little sanity check for me. I know I copied the build.command file, so I remove that. I remake the LBR. Now I have a copy of my original one on the system already in the O directory, where I tend to back stuff up at. You saw I had in the recipe the build.cmd file. I had to remove that. All right, so we're in CPM2 right now. We're not in MPM2. And I apologize for kind of jumping around and changing my terminal configurations along the way. I edited out a lot of footage because I ended up doing a lot of troubleshooting live as I was recording, and I didn't want all of that in there because it took up a lot of time. So here we're moving the new npm2.lbr with the DMA disabled. We're going to skip through some of this. Skipped it. So now we want to extract those files. And we're just going to overwrite everything in A. Most of this is identical. We're skipping ahead. So now we can boot into NPM with the DMA disabled. Of course, I got to type my random dir command. I do this on Linux too. I type ls just all the time when I'm thinking. Like, there's no reason to. We're getting rid of that copy. We have a backup of our DMA enabled one in O. So I don't want to keep that copy because I'm probably going to switch back to the DMA enabled one. But first we want to test if we have the same problem with Nulu. We are booted into NPM obviously at this point. This is the DMA disabled version. And again, if you don't want to pull your direct line low, direct one, build it like this the first time, and then you don't got to worry about it. So we're creating a new, we're going to skip ahead, and there we go. We have the same problem. So this is not a problem with DMA. So that's not what's causing that. It's clearly a problem with how Nulu interacts with the MPM2 system. And this is something we can troubleshoot later and we might be able to correct. I don't have the source code to Nulu. I might be able to find it somewhere, but uh, I haven't seen it before. So let's go ahead and restore our previous install. We will want to reboot the computer so we can get back into CPM. We just do the same thing. We're just going to overwrite all those files. There's only a few files that actually need to be changed, but just for sanity's sake, we just go ahead and we don't try to pick and choose those files. We just go ahead and I'm going to go ahead. I'm removing this. So this is build.cmd ended up in this one originally. And when I created this file in the first video and the last video, but now we're going to extract it. And you can see I have one deleted file there. So that's one less slot that I can use. Boot back into NPM. This is the DMA enabled version. And I've tested this. If you don't have that direct one line pulled low, and you try to launch this, it just will fail. It just simply won't launch. All right, so let's get back to the gamer setup. If we wanted to do the shared gamer setup where user 2 has the commands we need for user 0 and user 1 to go to switch back to themselves and to list directories, we can put these games. And look, here I am. I'm trying to add. I have not yet noticed that these deleted files are taking up space. So here I am trying to add these two files to the existing library. But you see, I have free slots. I have free entry. I have 0 free entries available. So I'm going to get errors when I do this. I'm deleting this because if I'm sharing the files between both users on a third user, I don't need extra copies of these games taking up space. In my mind, I've added the two commands. I didn't realize that I got errors there and that I didn't actually get those commands into this library archive. But I am successfully extracting to the C drive for user 2 all the games here. And we'll skip ahead here momentarily. Eventually. And this is a little slower than it would be on CPM2. MPM2, in order to make all its things happen, some of the processes are a little slower than they would be. You make a trade-off, speed for functionality in this case, and um, typically that's fine, but it is something to be aware of. If you're trying to use NPM2, um, you are going to have a little bit of a slower time with some activities, not all. Extraction is pretty much It's not much faster, but creating and copying files is a little bit slower. We actually didn't skip ahead because I wanted to. I've reattached my serial to both serial ports, my FTDIs, so now I have access to both users and through different physical hardware. I've switched back to user 0 and I've skipped ahead a little bit. You can see I'm switching tabs at the top, each of these tab terminals. Here I've realized what happened, and I don't want that copy of the game directory anymore, so I just got rid of it because it has no more entries. I may be able to use a command to extend the entries, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to create a new temporary directory because I do want to move, or a new temporary library because I do want to move those commands to the other user. And so far, Nulu is the easiest way I've found to do it. I could use pip, but user 2 would have to have access to pip, and I don't want to give user 2 pip. I just want to give them dir and user. There we go. Now, as I'm in user 2 already, I'm in the other tab. User 1 has changed to user 2. I can switch back to user 1. Everything user 2 has lives in the C drive, and that's it. I mean, that's it. So multiple ways we can handle installing games, whether we want, one administrative user, one gamer user, any commands really, whether we want 2 administrative users with full access to build tool chains, which is how I plan to configure mine, with a 3rd user that handles, extraneous tools such as games. And that's it. We are done with today's lessons. It's a little bit chaotic. The editing is a little weird because again, I'm recording the voiceover afterwards. I normally do this as I type, which makes it a little more cohesive. And I've cut out a lot of troubleshooting that I found out along the way. And then I sort of put together that last section there so that we could cover what that troubleshooting was, how I found out, and kind of what kinds of problems you might run into. Anyway, I will leave it at that. Y'all have fun. Somebody please write a Vi clone for me so that I don't have to figure it out. I really need Vi. I need Vi, and I need a good Vi that can handle full, gigantic text files that don't fit in memory in one page. So if somebody out there can use what I just did to make that happen, that would be awesome. Anyway, thanks for listening, y'all. Peace. This is Montevideo, Uruguay. I'm in Old Town, Ciudad Viajo. Still learning Spanish. Sigo aprendiendo español. It's beautiful here. This is where I do my computer science now.